don't heckle Josh.
You can change the size of the text too. And then for some of the longer ones, I just want to make sure. That you can see them. Again, oh, okay, that's like about as long as they are, right?
Drag it to full screen to the other screen.
On that side?
Yeah. If you click arrange, you should.
Can I see?
Yeah, I just didn't want to go live on your screen
with the notes. Here, if you go over here and just go back to slide 1, there's no notes. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, drag that over. Okay. You'll be able to see it to full screen now.
Can you see it? We can't see it over here. Your computer, your desktop is crazy. It slows your computer down.
I can't see, I'm sorry.
It's so tiny. Can I just like, is it possible?
Yeah.
Just go, oh man.
I can't see, I'm sorry.
No, you're good, you're good. Let me see if I can see. There you go.
Thank you.
Start, you don't want to give it a minute for people to filter back in?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Take a beat. Like this sleeping person, sleeping hero in the front row. The room is very bright. Like you can still see everyone's faces. The hats. Yes. The power of Branzino is with me. Do you want to announce that we're going to get started soon? So that people take like that. It's not playing.
Hi, my name is Ruby Justice Thelot.
And I'm Eileen Isagon Skyers.
And this is Figure Ground.
What do you see here? This image of a man was generated by Midjourney. And looking at it, we might recognize the peculiar visual cues that we've come to associate with AI generation, the gloss, the sheen, the uncanniness. But let's expand. What is outside of the frame? There is more to the image than the figure itself. It exists within an environment. The environment may define our interactions with the image more than the image itself. With the rapid advancements in AI technology, we have entered a radically new environment. The meaning of the images it produces is endlessly new, novel, ready for projecting onto. Artificial intelligence may well be the defining cultural and industrial paradigm of our lifetimes. Already it is getting too big to ignore. We're all bound up and implicated by this future, whether we're conscious of that or not.
Technology has affected the very idea of being since its discovery, or perhaps should I say, recovery. Every medium comes with its own set of consequences. 2,500 years ago, in the Phaedrus, Plato wrote that writing would engender the end of memory. The Egyptian god Thoth told the Egyptian king Thamus about his new invention. "Hear, O king, my discovery provides a recipe for memory and wisdom." But the king answered and said, "O man full of arts, the god-man Thoth, to one it is given to create the things of art, and to another to judge what measure of harm and of profit they have for those that shall employ them. What you have discovered is a recipe not for memory, but for reminder. It is not true that wisdom that you offer your disciples, but only a semblance of wisdom, for by telling them of the many things without teaching them, you will make them seem to know much, while for the most part they know nothing." Again, O man full of arts, to one it is given to create the things of art, and to another to judge what measures of harm and of profit for they have for those that shall employ them. Today we want to explore the harms and profit of this new medium. We have a long history of technological fears. Images were hated by early Christians for fear they might usurp the world. In the 20th century, French philosopher Barthes declared that writing had led to the death of the author, the central figure of Western humanist thought. The obsolescence of figures leads to the obsolescence of their makers. Still grieving the death of the author, must we now in this new century contend with the end of man?
As we carry on in our journey towards an artificial superintelligence, the human subject will only continue to be threatened, distributed, dispersed over the limits of our taxed cognition. But how do we develop a new system of symbols or metaphors for the unknown? Today, we'll look at the figure ground principle as it relates to our sense perceptions and representation of reality. And in doing so, we'll attempt to outline a framework for understanding our relationship to AI. The figure-ground relation is one of the earliest perceptual skills that develop in infancy. Concepts such as light, proximity, and objects as distinct from their surroundings are among the first things we come to understand. The black printed text against a white sheet of paper, for instance, is recognized as a subject or figure, while the sheet itself fades into substrate or background. When we look at a bowl of flowers on a red tablecloth, we may be very conscious of the flowers or figure, but much less conscious of the tablecloth, the ground, even though the tablecloth influences the way we see the flowers. If the tablecloth were blue, for instance, the flowers would appear to be a slightly different hue. Let's take a look at some of our earliest attempts at representation. Our story begins in South Africa, where markings of red ochre are made on cave walls to represent the world around us. What do we make of these markings, these geometric lines? Intentionally modified by scraping and grinding, the engraved pattern is considerably one of the earliest acts of representation, of reproducing or creating the figure. The figurative image is mimetic. It imitates nature. For Aristotle, the image is simulation. It engenders an emotional response in the viewer as they see themselves in what is depicted, fictional or otherwise. In this sense, you could argue that all images are artifice in some sense. They play on our sense perception as construct. From the printing press to the camera to the internet itself, the root fear of each new technology is that representations that can't be fully comprehended will ultimately become indistinguishable from reality. German philosopher Immanuel Kant qualified art for art's sake as one mode of approaching art in the Critique of Judgment, declaring content, subject matter, and any other external demands obsolete, Kant argued that the purpose of art is to be purposeless. Relatedly, the abstract artist and theorist Kandinsky posed the question, must we not then renounce the object altogether, throw it to the winds, and instead lay bare the purely abstract? No longer bound by figure, abstraction, he believed, was a vehicle for direct expression, circumventing language. Abstraction for Kandinsky is pure ground.
Of course, as we know, the representational image was challenged long before Kandinsky. Sensing danger, many culture advocated for iconoclasm, the belief that idols should be destroyed. Islam notoriously prohibits depictions of the Prophet. In Hadith 110, we read, angels would not enter a house where there are pictures. Early Christians held similar idea. Canon 36 from the Council of Elvira in 306 AD reads, pictures are not to be placed in churches so they do not become objects of worship or adoration. René Magritte's painting, The Treachery of Images, from 1929, depicts a pipe with the inscription, Ceci n'est pas une pipe. This is not a pipe. When asked about the sentence, Magritte replied, could you stuff my pipe? No, it's just a representation, isn't it? Magritte's intuition that representations are mistaken for objects themselves, that images usurp reality, was shared by philosopher Willem Flusser.
In his 1983 essay Towards a Philosophy of Photography, Flusser wages one of the best modern criticisms of the image. He claims that after the act of image production, the connection between the image and its maker evanesces. Essentially, this is a question of amnesia, he writes. Human beings forget they created the images in order to orientate themselves in the world. Imagination has turned into hallucination. Flusser believes that we misconstrue images thinking that they are screens or representations of the world, when they are instead maps, approximations. And this misattribution leads to a lack of criticality. This amnesia is what allows images to become objects of worship or adoration in the religious context. We fall for the figure becomes world. This is in part why AI anthropomorphism offers an easy way out. In many representations of AI that we're familiar with today, it appears almost human. A chatbot, an assistant, a tutor. The more AI complements human interaction, the more easily it can be integrated into human culture. This subtle integration leads to a naturalization of the technology. We come to see it as always been there. It becomes sticky. We stop being able to imagine a world without it. We start to think like it. So how does the machine see and understand figuration? We train artificial neural networks by showing them millions of training examples, gradually adjusting parameters until it provides the results we want. Not unlike infants adapting to their surroundings, for the very first time, neural networks had to be trained to discern edges, shapes, and objects in relation to surrounding data in their own unique way. What effect will this new way of seeing engender on being? Media theorist Marshall McLuhan's tetrad is a useful framework for understanding the effect of each new medium on society. For each new medium, McLuhan asks that we question, what does the medium enhance? What does it make obsolete? What does the medium retrieve that had been obsolesced earlier? And what does the medium reverse or flip into when pushed to its very extremes?
The tetrad expresses the effects of a new medium, but it also presents these effects through the figure-ground binary. Enhancement and retrieval are motions related to the figure. They amplify what is visible, and retrieve, that is, they bring to the surface new forms. Obsolescence and reversal target the ground. Their impact is felt around the frame of the medium. So, how would you place AI on the tetrad? One could say, for instance, that AI enhances the productive capacity of machines, the figure aspect. AI ultimately obsolesces human intervention in generative processes. Of course, that's the ground. AI, through its linguistic interfaces, retrieves the power of the word, which had been waning in a world of images, the figure. But what happens when it is pushed to extremes? What emerges? The reversal. Pushed to an extreme, AI leads to a tipping point, a figurative saturation, where all the elements in the data sets are themselves generated by the automated systems. The models become recursive, mirrors of their own creations. David Runnick, in his 2022 Fest keynote from last year with Eric Hugh, noted that the new generation of image viewers will grow up in a world where most of the images will be AI generated. Interestingly enough, we can actually map or predict the moment of this pictorial singularity. The 22 paper from Villalobos et al., Will We Run Out of ML Data, shows us that there are about 8 to 23 trillion images currently on the internet, growing at an 8% growth rate. On the other hand, AI produces about 10 million images a day. If we assume a 50% growth rate year over year, the flippening will happen in just 20 years. The future condition is the reversal of the automated system. Neural networks refracting ad infinitum amongst themselves, the synthetic and artificial meld to become the synficial, the dominating form, effacing and dwarfing all else. At this point, the blurring is complete. The syncresis of figuring ground. The modern world is precipitated in a permanent state of hyper-reality where the figures we look at are no longer tethered to their human maker. Rather, they exist for their own sake. They are autotelic. These figures will represent a world not centered on humans, but rather centered on networks themselves. But in that sense, they sow their own demise, because we do not inhabit the world of networks. By abolishing the figure and leaving only itself, the infrastructure, the network, the ground, the technology is reversed because we humans cannot subsist on ground alone. For an example of reversal, we could look to Roland Barthes, who talks about writing as the cause of the death of the author. Writing carries this innate tension. It enhances the figure of the author, but also accelerates the author towards its abolition, encouraging the birth of the reader. He writes, l'écriture est une destruction de toute voix, de toute origine. L'écriture est ce neutre, ce composite, cet oblique où fuit notre sujet. Le noir et le blanc vient se perdre toute identité, à commencer par celle-là même de celui qui écrit. Writing is the destruction of all voice, of all origin. Writing is this line of flight where the subject disappears, the dichotomy where all identity is lost, starting with the one who writes. Technologies, in that sense, hold within their own systems their demise. Barthes also notes that ancient writing was not the work of a singular genius. It was mediated by the shaman or the bard. The author is a relatively new concept. It's very modern, born out of the transition from medieval times to humanism. He says about the author can only imitate a preceding gesture, never novel. Their only power is the melange of writings and subversion by one or the other. L'écrivain ne peut qu'imiter un geste toujours antérieur, jamais originel. Son seul pouvoir est de mêler les écritures, de les contrarier les unes par les autres. Who else in our cultural paradigm is accused of imitating? Does the description of the author by Barthes not remind you of the parroting of large language models? By their death, the author liberated the reader. The birth of the reader, Barthes writes, is the reward of the death of the author. Every demise leads to new opportunities, new reversals. This time is no different.
In our current understanding of technology, each new innovation evinces the previous paradigm. For most people, imagining a world in which we are no longer the central intelligence is nearly impossible. Curator and writer Nora Khan has aptly used the metaphor of a hurricane to describe this impending superintelligence. When it is all around you, you can't see its eye or sense its danger. A machinic mind with infinite cognitive memory and processing ability that can only be tracked and traced, never controlled.
What if this displacement was the original telos, or goal, of technology? In the question concerning technology, Heidegger tackles the question of technology on a metaphysical level. He foresees a part of the danger latent within technology, albeit not the entirety of its gravity. Foregoing the practical definitions of technology via examples in our daily lives, rather he defines it as a way of revealing. However, the implications are much more severe than Heidegger's the essence of technology may come to presence in the coming of past to truth. Because technology is a mode of understanding. It develops in ways beyond our comprehension and control. It changes the way we are in the world, namely by unconcealing the notion of standing reserve, seeing now the resources around us as potentialities, stocks for further usage, not as things in and of themselves. Footnote 16 of the essay elucidates this revelation. Objects, he says, indeed lose their character as objects when they are caught up in the standing reserve. In this transfiguration, an ontological seismic shift occurs, stripping objects of their objectness. The logical conclusion of this transfiguration is to progress from de-objectification to dehumanization, whereby humans lose their unique ontological characteristics, their Dasein. And what is the opposite of existence, if not death?
Perhaps the artist can save us. Not unlike the ideals of abstraction put forth by Kandinsky, the artist seeks to look beyond the ground to alter the frame. Artists today seek to reveal the ground, the infrastructures, and systems themselves. If the technology holds its own demise, perhaps the only way out is through. Perhaps we may indeed, unlike what Audre Lorde claimed, dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. We just might accelerate technologies towards their own reversal. As machine intelligence imaging rapidly develops, we may imagine many AI artists will draw the accusation shared with early photographers, claims that art produced with this technology is not real art. With the introduction of AI, the very question of objecthood, legitimacy, authenticity, and reproducibility posed by McLuhan, Flusser, Heidegger, and the like become increasingly consequential. They shift from metaphorical to literal. As with any medium, much art created with AI will be dismissed as pure kitsch, and already has been, but many new discoveries will be made. If previous eras of art and technology hybridity are any indicator, then artists working both systematically and critically with neural networks will offer new compass with which we might navigate culture, nature, and perception itself. To follow the teleology of this technology introduces its own kind of acceleration, the acceleration of the production of images and information by automated agents.
Operating with a sense of awareness, a proximity to the ground, can bring about a more conscious approach to our encounters with these automated systems and their productions. Since our primitive cave markings, we have evidence that recording is a civilizational project for generations to come. Many of the recording infrastructures that we've built, images, writing, computation, have been underpinned by our Enlightenment thinking, a belief that knowledge leads to control and freedom, a release from tutelage. Our recording project may be under threat by artificial images until the systems become saturated. We know now that the image is not a representation of our world, but that of the network. Saturation will make that evident. To acknowledge what is ground, i.e. systematic reproduction of images around us, frees the artist. We know that it is not a pipe. Knowing that it's not a pipe, we can return to pure creation. We can be free. We can be in the cave again. Thank you. Questions? We'll open the floor for questions if anybody has any. That's a great question, and also a very large question. Mainly, there's an entire field of philosophy, anthropological philosophy, that focuses on the defining characteristics of what it means to be human. So depending on which philosophy you espouse, you may have a different definition. I think one thing we haven't done as a humanity is come to terms with a current and common definition of what it means to be human. Not so long ago, certain peoples were excluded from these definitions. That being said, I think the very notion of superintelligence is a bit misguided because it tends to rely on specific characteristics, usually of like IQ or ability to pass a test. And I think heuristically we know that that is not all that there is to be human. And I think the return and the notion, and when we say that the evidence of saturation can lead to the realization that these things are not real life, can bring us back to our humanity. So to accelerate superintelligence to its end, to its saturation, can bring us back to what actually it means for us to be human, to be back in the cave again. Yeah, of course. So the interesting thing is that so there's this image of the movie Ghost in the Shell. So part of the research on Heidegger's The Question Concerning Technologies comes from this meta-essay that I wrote called The Telos of Technology. And in it, I posit this sort of melding and this meshing of human and machine as one of the potential outcomes of the advent of this machinic intelligence. There are specific people who are interested in that outcome. A lot of transhumanists are very much into that melding. They have a specific agenda with that. To me, it is very much the potential to create a perfect body to repair, of course, our mortal coil, right? And that has specific, I think, philosophical ambitions, which are contentious and controversial. Another option is, you know, R.I.P. TED, but some people want the complete abandon of technology, Ted Kaczynski. And that is another option that you can face as you read these texts and see what's happening. Shut it down, you know, in the words of Liz Lemon. A third, which I think is ours, is the acceleration. Is to bring the technology to its end and show what it actually pretends to create or make. And to us, it's the saturation. And that leads us, that makes us free to sort of then deal with the world itself as it is. Well, it's the Heidegger quote, right? It's the revealing of the coming of truth. We don't really know what that is, right? But the only way out, at least in this specific theory or hypothesis, is through. And we will encounter the consequences of that decision, potentially in the future. Hopefully not, because hopefully not. Hopefully there'll be an internal breakage, because the systems, the cool thing about the paper, the Villalobos paper from 2022, is that there's not enough current data from humans to sort of feed all the machine learning algorithms that we have currently. And so there will come a time where we will need to use productions from automated systems to feed them again. And so that, I think, internal feedback loop, which is embedded within the, the very structure of it, what do they want? Scale. You need more images, more text. At some point, that will cause its own demise. That's the hope. Exactly. And then we realize that it's no longer true. And we stop perceiving it as it being reality, because we know it's just a feedback loop within itself. maybe the few things that Gemma is doing. By the way, we didn't introduce ourselves. You don't know why I'm here speaking about this. And Eileen is the founder of Gemma Projects, a cultural platform which I think addresses some of the funding issues. They've revived Mid-Fund right now. I'm Ruby. I run a research and design studio called 1310141, long name. We do research on the future and technology. But there are some alternative options. I think we're all here because we're interested in these potential futures of funding, whether it be through NFTs or through Web3 or the Nouns model. And do you want to talk about what Mid-Fund is doing and what they did?
Sure. I don't know how well this answers your question, but a part of what Mint Fund was doing in early NFT days, like January 2021 or so, was helping creators fund projects to be minted on chain during a time when gas fees were still incredibly high. And part of what Gemma is doing now to address some of these funding issues within the bear market that we currently find ourselves in is commissioning new projects by artists. So I think that we really look to the collective for funding. I don't know how much this relates to the example of the cave, but I can say that what we're doing at Gemma currently is kind of reflecting on the lessons learned from museums and traditional funding organizations and trying to cull inspiration from some of the best parts of those and bring them on chain to help support artists.
It's a door stopper at our house.
Well, there is that one point where you say, Ruby shared, that with AI, like learning language models are kind of like parroting this idea of the author's death, essentially.
Yeah, and Bart has this like wonderful line in the Death of the Author essay, which is like that the author is imitating previous things, and so I'm trying to draw a parallel between how Bart perceives the author as it dies, and how I think it's Emily Bender who has the stochastic parrot line, and so in that sense, it's a parallel between how we consider both figures or both agents in our system, and the other thing is that writing costs its own reversal, right? And so each technology has within itself the seeds of its own demise. That was the example I was trying to draw. Sorry if it was kind of arcane. Not so much it becoming Dasein, but just it abolishing, that's, at least in my reading of the essay, the point or something you could draw from it. I think there are other options than just the annihilation of being from technology. The three that I mentioned, and in this specific idea, technology is responsible for the annihilation of Dasein, but not, it doesn't become anything else. That was just its aim all along. Yeah. That's a great question. So last bit was, can you repeat that last bit? I like that sentence a lot. What'd you say? Just if AI imagery is no. Yeah, let me answer in a minute 45 seconds. I think what's interesting is that at first, it begins with under the pretense of representing our reality, of doing approximations of our reality. You know, we feed it these data sets, and then it produces images that look like our world. And so we are still in the phase where there is this sentiment that, just like Flusser, we're seeing it as a screen. So you may have been subject to spoofs or fake images, and those fake images, I think, are very much in the realm of this hyper-reality, right? The inability, as Baudrillard would say, for us to see the difference between fiction and reality. The point here is not that necessarily that they have their own system of images or symbols, but rather that because their aim is to scale the amount of images they are trained on, and also to produce more and more images. To us, at least, I think that is one of the functions of these systems, is production of images. That requires more and more images, and ultimately, that will require the training on images no longer created by humans, but by networks and systems. And so, I think I say refraction ad infinitum, just like the images within the data sets will be composed of more AI-trained images, AI-generated images than human images at the 22-year mark. And that will become their quote-unquote reality, but they don't have any, they're not sentient, it's just, that's the system or the network within which they exist. Rather than reality, I think that's a difference in terminology. Josh? Come again?
I think that depends on your definition of creativity.
Right, so in the critique of judgment, Kant says that creativity is, or genius is the ability to take a set of rules, break it, and that is only the purview of the genius. He says that most artists are imitating because they are learning through masters and then sort of copying that. In a sense, the AI systems also do a bit of that deep learning or that learning and then copy. The notion of creativity is very, very different. There's a recent study that's very interesting that asks humans to compare outputs from humans and AI systems and rate the creativity of these systems. And one thing we notice in terms of creativity is that there is a subsegment, a margin of, say, like 10% of humans who have the top level of creativity, and for the rest, they're sort of neck to neck with AI. And that's, of course, you know, just an ARVIC study, whatever, but we have different perceptions of it, and the result, when perceived by others, I think depends on being in that maybe genius or 10% category, based on this study. Essentially, this is one thing that's really, really cool about the death of the author, and I'm speaking too much right now, but is that the death of the author leads to the birth of the reader, meaning the audience. And so the audience is responsible for the appreciation of the text or of the image. And so it's not so much that the AI becomes very, very good at producing something. It really depends on what the audience thinks in this paradigm. Another study that I can mention here is one where they ask people to rate images generated by AI or human, and we have a anthropomorphical bias. So we like things that are made by humans more than dogs or non-human things. And so, you know, we root for our own. So by homophily, we were potentially just always like the things that humans create more. Yeah, we're over time. Thank you so much.